The roses had bloomed late that year, which was odd for mid-September in Gloucestershire. But on the sprawling estate of Sir Hugo Barrington, industrialist, retired parliamentarian, and vocal horticulturist, it seemed even nature bowed to peculiar tastes. At precisely 7:30 each morning, the groundskeeper, old Henry Dobb, would be seen inspecting the western rose walk, clipping, trimming, and muttering as if each petal answered him back. That routine had not changed in 20 years until this morning. At 8:12 a.m., Miss Letitia Vale, Sir Hugo's secretary, stumbled across something she would later describe as a sight both serene and repulsive. Henry Dobb was sprawled beneath the central arch of the rose pergola, one hand still wrapped loosely around his clippers, the other outstretched toward a broken pot of burgundy queen petals. His face was pale, lips blue, eyes open in glassy calm, as though he'd paused mid-prayer or perhaps mid-sentence. Letitia screamed once sharply, which was enough to summon the entire household. Sir Hugo, dressed in his wool dressing gown, barked orders. The cook fainted. The chauffeur, Jackson, offered brandy. But the only sound that truly lingered was the murmuring wind rustling through the overgrown rose bushes, a wind that seemed somehow unnaturally warm. By noon, the local police had arrived, led by Inspector Colin Merrow, a man more confident in his mustache than his observations. Part failure, he declared, with authority after a 5-minute inspection. No signs of struggle. Natural causes. Clear as day. The man was 72. But he was in excellent health, Letitia protested. He gardened for hours, rain or shine. He also smoked hand-rolled tobacco, Merrow added with a shrug. That's death enough. Sir Hugo waved away the conversation and turned to his son, Ronald. See to the arrangements. Have someone from the county take care of the remains. I have a council meeting in 2 days. But even as the servants dispersed and the body was respectfully covered, there was something amiss, something not quite right. Ronald, in his own awkward way, hovered near the spot and stared at the spilled clippers. They were clean, too clean. The cuffs of Henry's trousers were muddied, yet his boots were dry. And beneath the pergola, there was an odd aroma, not floral, not earthy, but something acrid. That same evening, a curious telegram arrived at Whitehaven Mansions, London. The sender was a woman of few words, but impeccable instincts. Unnatural death. Rose Walk. Sir Hugo Bington Estate. Come at once if interested. Elvie. It reached Hercule Poirot at precisely 6:50 p.m. as he finished his second tisane and corrected the arrangement of his silverware for the 4th time. Mon Dieu, he murmured, tapping the telegram against his chin. A gardener dead amongst his roses. If ever there was a setting for a theatrical exit, it is this. Poirot packed lightly, just a pair of shoes, a toothbrush, and a particular interest in human contradictions. By the next morning, he had arrived at Barrington Hall under a cloudless sky. Sir Hugo met him with narrowed eyes and a stiff posture. We did not invite you, Miss Hugo. Ah, but nature did it not? Poirot replied cheerfully. And Mademoiselle Vale, whom I trust to be precise in all matters, merely extended a curiosity. Sir Hugo scowled. You'll find nothing here. The man was old. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Old age measures is not a motive for falling face first among one's roses. Letitia greeted Poirot warmly and led him through the house. It was a cold place, not architecturally, but emotionally. The hallways bore ancestral portraits of men who stared with distant authority. The drawing room was elegant, but untouched, as though lived in only for appearances. And the dining room table was set for 12, though only 4 resided in the house. Besides Sir Hugo and his secretary, there were 2 others. Ronald Barrington, the son, a sheepish man with ink-stained fingers and a distracted air, and Madame Sylvie, Hugo's second wife, a Frenchwoman 20 years his junior, with sharp cheekbones and a sharper tongue. She offered Poirot coffee, but asked no questions, only observed. Poirot wasted no time. He requested to see the Rose Walk before luncheon. The garden was sprawling and immaculate in a performative way. The paths were straight, the bushes trimmed geometrically, and yet something felt off, as if everything had been arranged for display, rather than nurture. Poirot stopped under the rose pergola, stared down at the disturbed earth where the body had been found, and said softly, "Tell me, Mademoiselle Vale, did the good monsieur do keep to routine?" "Religiously," Letitia replied. "He would scold us if we walked on the grass before 10, said it bruised the roots." "Then why?" Poirot said, crouching with a whis. "Does this earth appear freshly disturbed at sunrise?" He found a faint scuff mark by the post. He found a tiny shard of glass, and he found on a lower branch of the climbing rose a smear of something pink, but not quite floral. Poirot stood, eyes narrowed. "Madame Sylvia is from Provence, n'est-ce pas?" "Yes," Letitia replied. "She married Sir Hugo last spring." "Quite the surprise." Poirot nodded. "And Merald, he inherits the estate." "Should anything happen to Sir Hugo?" Letitia blinked. Yes, I believe so." Poirot's mustache twitched. At luncheon, Poirot declined the fish. Instead, he stared at each person around the table with deliberate intent. Madame Sylvie cut her salmon slowly, eyes never leaving Poirot. Ronald barely touched his food. Sir Hugo drank his sherry as if defying someone. Poirot simply smiled. "A garden," he said aloud, "is a most deceptive place. One buries seeds and expects flowers. But sometimes buried things return, not as we remember." Sir Hugo glared. "Are you accusing someone of murder, monsieur?" Poirot raised a brow. "Murder? Ah, no, not yet. But something unnatural blooms in your rose garden, and I intend to name it." He stood. "Now, if you will excuse me, I must speak to the bees. They are terrible liars, but very poor at hiding guilt." He left the room without another word. Behind him, Ronald dropped his fork. Madame Sylvie tilted her head, and Sir Hugo's knuckles tightened around his glass. Pooh had only just arrived, but the game had already begun. Pooh did not speak again until late that afternoon when he asked Letitia Vale to summon the household to the library. "Nothing formal, mademoiselle," he added, "only a gathering, as one does when curious minds align." The library at Barrington Hall was dimly lit, paneled in walnut, with 3 high windows looking out over the eastern lawn. The fire was lit more for atmosphere than need, and Poirot arranged the seating himself, deliberately placing Madame Sylvia and Sir Hugo at opposite ends, with Ronald adrift between them. Letitia stood by the door, her pencil in hand, as if taking dictation from fate. Poirot began gently. "It is often said that death comes quietly to the old, but I do not accept such resignation. It is not the age of a man that writes the final chapter. It is the manner, and Monsieur Henry Dobb was a man of habits, routine, devotion. One does not abandon such traits without reason." He turned to Sir Hugo. "Your groundskeeper, monsieur, was employed here for how long?" 22 years, Sir Hugo replied stiffly. "Since before my first wife passed." "And you trusted him?" "Implicitly." Yet you dismissed any irregularity in his death without hesitation. Curious. Sir Hugo's jaw clenched. I am not one for theatrics. Poirot nodded mildly and turned to Ronald. And you, Menda, did you know Mr. Dobb? Well, Ronald shifted uncomfortably. Not well. He wasn't one for conversation. But he did give me a book once on grafting orchids. Said I seemed the sort to understand things that bloom slowly. Poirot's eyes sparkled. How poetic. And when did he give you this? Ronald hesitated. About a month ago, just after he had a row with father. Sir Hugo's head snapped toward his son. What row? Ronald winced. About the fencing by the southern plot. He said you were cutting through soil he'd been improving for years. You said it was your land. Poirot said nothing, only nodded. Next, he turned to Madame Sylvie, who met his gaze with a cool smile. And you, Madame? Did you like the gardener? She smiled faintly. He was not charming, but he knew his place. We had little to discuss. No conversations at all. None of interest. Once he said French roses were too proud to thrive in English mud. I did not correct him. Poole let the silence stretch before addressing Laetitia. Mademoiselle Vale, you were the one who discovered the body. N'est-ce pas? Yes, she said, her voice composed. I had come to find him. He usually left a note when he'd pruned the northern borders. He hadn't, and I noticed from the window that the west pergola seemed still, oddly still. You did not touch the body. No, I called for help. Poirot turned his attention to the group as a whole. So we have 5 individuals in this house, each with different relationships to the late Henry Dobb. Let us consider them. He moved to the mantel, touching a small porcelain urn idly. Miss Barrington, a man of power who has ruled this estate as he ruled his company decisively. A man whose patience for dissent is thin. Sir Hugo stared, but said nothing. Muir Ronald, a son born of a different temperament, a man of ink, not iron. Gentle, perhaps, overlooked, perhaps, but not without his thoughts. Ronald flushed. Madame Sylvie, Poirot continued, smiling slightly. A woman of elegance, French by blood, refined by marriage, one whose roses bloom far from home, and who may not enjoy the English cold. Sylve's eyes narrowed just slightly. Poirot turned to Laetitia. And you, mademoiselle, the unseen pillar, the efficient one, the one who observes but does not comment, always present yet never in the way. Laetitia looked startled. I've only tried to do my job. Ah, but the quiet ones, mademoiselle, they often see the most. Poirot straightened. A man has died. No witnesses, no sign of struggle, no obvious weapon, but the ground tells a story. Disturbed earth, an odd scent, and a trace of something unnatural. I have sent for tests on the substance found on the rose thorns. Until then, I will speak to each of you privately. You will, of course, remain on the grounds. Sir Hugo stood. Are you implying someone in this house? Poirot raised a hand. No, Missy, I do not imply. I observe. He turned to Laetitia. Please have tea brought in, and then I will begin with Madame Sylvie. As the others dispersed, some stiffly, others silently, Poirot lingered behind with Ronald, who had hung back by the window. You are fond of orchids? Poirot asked softly. Ronald nodded. They're precise. You can't rush them. They bloom when they're ready. Not before. Poirot smiled. And do you keep any here? No. The greenhouse was father's domain. Only roses, tomatoes, and speeches about fertilizer. Poirot studied him a moment longer. Tell me, did Monsieur Dobb ever speak of his past? Ronald blinked. No, but once I asked why he never married. And He just said, some things grow in the dark. Doesn't mean they should. I didn't understand. Poirot nodded again. Mercy, monsieur. Later in the drawing room, Poirot sat alone by the fire, staring into the flames as if the answers danced there. He was not yet sure who had killed Henry Dobb, or even what had, but the estate held secrets. That much was certain. There were bruises beneath the soil, petals with poison, and humans with their perfumed lies and thorny truths. Outside, the wind had shifted, and somewhere in the garden, a single rosebud fell from its stem with a sound almost too soft to notice. But Poirot noticed. He always noticed after a subdued supper in which hardly anyone spoke beyond the obligatory "pass the salt." Poirot requested to conduct his interviews the following morning in the conservatory, a room, more glass than structure, attached to the eastern wing of the manor. It had once been a sanctuary of Sir Hugo's first wife, filled with exotic plants and an aviary of finches long since flown. The light was excellent, the warmth artificial, and Poirot liked the symbolism of truth blooming in a room built for growth. Laetitia Vale was first. She entered precisely at 8 o'clock, not a minute early or late. Dressed in an olive green dress with a gray wool cardigan, she looked very much like one who understood the importance of appearances. Poirot offered her a seat opposite him beside a small table set with tea. He observed how she declined the cup without hesitation. "Mademoiselle," he began, "you are a woman of precision. I respect that. I suspect Sir Hugo does too. Tell me, how long have you been in his employment?" "6 years," she replied. "I was brought on to assist with correspondence after his health began to falter. Since then, my responsibilities have expanded. I now handle most estate affairs." Poirot tilted his head, including financial matters. "I manage payroll and scheduling, but Sir Hugo retains control of the investments and estate decisions." "You are loyal to him." Laetitia paused. "I am loyal to my role. I believe in efficiency, not sentiment." Poirot smiled. "A very English answer. And Mr. Dobb, did you speak often?" "Occasionally. He didn't care much for indoor people, as he called us. But he was never rude, just quiet, focused. You could leave a note for him, and it would be done without question. And you were the one who discovered the body." "Yes. You opened the window first?" "I did. It was too warm in the compartment, and She stopped, caught herself. "Sorry, force of habit. I meant I looked from the east window of the study. The garden was unusually still. No movement under the pergola, which is odd because Henry was always there early." Poirot made a mental note of her slip. "Mercy Medicelle. You may send in Mercier Ronald next." Ronald entered hesitantly, holding a sketchbook under his arm. He looked as though he'd been up all night. His hair was unbrushed, and the ink on his fingers had smudged onto the cuff of his sleeve. "Good morning," he said awkwardly. "Miss Vale said you wanted to ask me things." Poirot gestured to the chair. "We miss you, but only if you are comfortable." Ronald sat, then shifted uncomfortably. "I've never seen a dead body before. Well, not like that. It didn't feel real. You said he gave you a book." Ronald nodded. "On orchid hybrids out of the blue. Just handed it to me one morning. He said something like, 'There's more value in something rare and hard-won than in a dozen petals that wilt at the first frost.' I thought it was kind. You felt close to him." "I wouldn't say close, but I liked him. He treated me like someone with a mind." Poirot leaned in slightly. "And your father, does he?" Ronald looked down. "He thinks I'm weak. I write essays and read poetry. He'd rather I took up shooting or chaired a board. And Madame Sylvie, Ronald's head jerked up. She's complicated. I think she's cleverer than father realizes. More. Then she lets on. I caught her once in the garden at dawn, before anyone was up, just staring at the rose pergola. When was this? 3 days before Henry died. Did you ask her why? She just smiled and said she liked the quiet before the household woke. Poirot nodded. Merci, monsieur. Ronald hesitated, then added, Do you think it was poison that he was murdered? Poirot's voice was soft. That is what I intend to discover. Next came Madame Sylvie. She entered with a hint of perfume and an unreadable expression. She wore gloves, though the room was warm, and removed them slowly, as if peeling back layers of her performance. Madame, Poirot said warmly, you are most graceful to meet with me. She smiled coolly. And you are persistent, Monsieur Poirot? Ha, but it is not persistence. It is curiosity. A gardener dies among his roses, and no one seems surprised. Sylvie sipped her tea delicately. Perhaps because he was old. Old men die. Indeed, but not always so suddenly, or so theatrically. What did you think of Henry Dobb? She shrugged. He disapproved of me. That much was clear. Why? He had affection for your English way of things. My presence, I think, reminded him that not all traditions last. He spoke often of the real roses he used to grow before synthetic fertilizers were introduced. Everything was better before. He belonged to the past. Poirot smiled faintly. But past is not so easily buried, madame. Sometimes it sprouts through the cracks. She watched him steadily. Are you accusing me of something? Not at all. I'm merely planting seeds. Sylvia narrowed her eyes. Careful where you plant them, Musa. Some soil is poisonous. Poirot's smile widened. Ah, then you do believe in poisons. I believe in choices. She rose before he dismissed her and glided from the room without another word. Poirot sat still for a moment, letting her presence settle before calling for Sir Hugo. Huh? Old man arrived with shoulders squared, cane in hand. He sat down with a grunt. Let's not waste time. I didn't kill him if that's your angle. Poirot clasped his hands calmly. No angle, monsieur. Only inquiry. You had an argument with him about a patch of dirt, so Hugo growled. He was insubordinate. Claimed I was disturbing some cherished compost pile. As if I needed his permission, you were expanding the fencing. Yes, I want to build a new greenhouse. He said it would ruin the soil. Poirot nodded slowly. Did you threaten to dismiss him? I told him to remember his place. Poirot looked directly at him. And did he? Sir Hugo didn't answer. After a moment, Poirot leaned back. One last question. Do you believe your son is fit to inherit this estate? Sir Hugo's eyes hardened. He's not me. That's his problem. No, monsieur, Poirot said softly. That is his strength. When Sir Hugo left, Poirot sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the small glass dish where a rose petal had fallen from Sylve's glove. He touched it gently, then opened a folded piece of parchment he'd retrieved earlier from the rose garden, tucked into the soil by the third arch of the pergola. On it were words scrolled in trembling handwriting. Some roses bloomed for love. Others bloomed to hide the thorns beneath. Poirot folded the notes slowly. The case, it seemed, had more roots than he had first expected, and some were beginning to bleed through the soil. The following day, Inspector Colin Marrow returned to Barrington Hall, summoned not by Poirot, but by Sir Hugo himself. The inspector arrived with visible irritation, his boots still muddy from the fields, and his mustache bristling as if it had absorbed some of his frustration. "I don't appreciate being dragged back into a matter already concluded," he grumbled, tossing his coat over a chair in the study. Poirot was already seated, perfectly composed, sipping a tisane with a sliver of lemon. "And yet, monsieur, you came." Mayo huffed. "Sir Hugo says you're stirring the pot, asking questions, suggesting foul play. Have you any proof or just theatre?" Poirot gave a gentle shrug. "It is not my habit to accuse without precision, but I see what others do not. Consider Henry Dobb was a man of routine, healthy, and yet he died suddenly, without warning, in his place of ritual. Heart attack, pure and simple. Non. He fell forward, not backward, as if pulled by something. The boots were dry, yet the earth was wet, and there was something on the roses, an unnatural residue. I've sent it for testing." Marrow squinted. "You think it's poison? I think it is not natural, but let us return to something simpler we motive. Who stands to gain from the death of Henry Dobb?" Mio waved a hand. "No one. He was a gardener." Poirot set down his cup. "Gardener, yes, but also keeper of land, of secrets. Perhaps he knew too much, or perhaps he stood in someone's way." That was when Jackson, the chauffeur, knocked on the door. "Apologies, sir, but there's something you should see in the potting shed." They followed him to the far end of the garden, to a squat wooden structure nestled behind the hedges. Inside, the air was musty with overturned pots, rusted shears, and the faint scent of mold. But what caught their attention was the broken drawer at the far end of the work table. It had been forced open. Marrow leaned in. "This drawer wasn't like this the day he died." Jackson shook his head. "No, sir. I checked for tools. Was locked. Now it's busted." Poirot bent to examine the splintered edge. "Curious. And what is missing?" Jackson pointed to a gap in the wall rack. "That there used to be a small copper canister. Looked like an old tea tin. Never knew what was in it. Dobb kept it close like it mattered." Marrow straightened. "So someone broke in to steal it. After the fact, which suggests panic, guilt." Gaze swept the room. Then he moved to the small stove in the corner and picked up a crumpled page from the ash bin. Carefully, he unrolled it. Half the page was charred, but a few lines were still visible. "Compound works quickly, if undetected. Best applied through moisture," or Marrow narrowed his eyes. "Poison. It's a recipe. Or notes." Poirot said nothing. Mayo turned sharply to Jackson. "Who else has access to this shed?" Jackson scratched his head. "Just the house staff and Ronald, I suppose. He used to come here when he was younger." The inspector didn't hesitate. "Let's speak to the boy." Poirot's expression remained unreadable as they returned to the house. Ronald was in the library, sketching abstract spirals into a journal. When confronted, he looked startled but not frightened. "The shed," Ronald repeated. "I haven't been there in weeks. Not since spring, I think." Marrow crossed his arms. "You knew Dog. He gave you a book. You argued with your father over the garden. And now the man's dead. And we find notes about poison and a stolen canister." Ronald's voice quivered. "You think I killed him? Did you?" "No," me pressed. "Then explain the sketch I found in your notebook." "The spiral pattern matches the arrangement of the roses under the pergola." "Why would you draw that?" Ronald flushed. "Because he showed it to me. He had a system for pruning. He called it a natural spiral to let the air flow better. It was just something he said." Poirot finally intervened. "Where were you the night before his death?" Ronald blinked. "In my room. I stayed up reading. Ask Letitia. She brought me tea around midnight." Letitia was summoned. She confirmed the story, albeit reluctantly. "He didn't seem himself that night," she added. "Kept asking about inheritance law. I thought he was just overthinking." Morrow's eyes gleamed. "So he was thinking about what happens if Sir Hugo dies, and who would inherit. That's motive enough." Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami. Curiosity is not guilt, but the damage was done." Ronald's name was now whispered in the hallways. The staff avoided his gaze. And even Sir Hugo looked at him with narrowed eyes. That evening, Madame Sylvie visited Poirot in the conservatory. Her face was pale, her hands gloved again. "I heard about Ronald," she said softly. "You must know it isn't him." Poirot studied her. "And what makes you so certain?" "He's many things. Frightened, isolated, but not capable of planning a murder." Hero said nothing. She leaned closer. "I heard Henry Dobb threaten Sir Hugo once quietly under his breath. Something about knowing the truth." Hugo laughed, but Henry didn't. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "And what truth would that be?" Sylvie smiled without warmth. "You're the detective, miss, but I'll tell you this. My husband treats loyalty as ownership. The gardener may have been the only man who ever told him no." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are very observant, madam." "I've had to be," she rose. "But if you pursue Ronald too far, you'll miss the root of it all. Be careful where you dig, Morrow. You might find something planted long before this death." After she left, Poirot returned to the note he had recovered. The partially burned page was scientific but imprecise, more observation than formula. The mention of moisture intrigued him. He thought again of the rose pergola, morning dew, a precise application point. Then he reviewed Ronald's sketch, the spiral. No one else had mentioned the pruning system. No one else knew about Henry Don's methods, but someone had taken the canister. Someone had burned the notes, and someone had left a smear of residue on the roses. Poirot stared long into the night, tapping his fingers rhythmically. Marrow had his suspect, Ronald Barrington, but Poirot felt something itch at the edge of his mind, a detail unaligned, a thread tugging where it should have lain flat. The false lead was set, but Poirot, ever patient, would wait for it to unravel. The morning sun cast an amber sheen through the conservatory windows, touching the orcas with a warmth that contrasted with the tense undercurrents running through Bington Hall. Ronald remained confined to the estate by Marrow's instruction, not officially accused, but unofficially regarded with increasing suspicion. The household moved around him as though he carried contagion. Poirot, however, had other intentions. He was not interested in forceful interrogations or hasty arrests. His domain was the mind, the subtle gestures, the pauses too long, the instinct to glance away. He believed, as always, that to unsettle the guilty, one need only present order to their chaos and wait. That afternoon, Poirot requested tea to be served in the drawing room. He made a point of having it prepared by the cook rather than served by staff, and insisted everyone be present: Sir Hugo, Madame Sylvie, Letitia, and Ronald. He greeted them all with warmth, complimented the arrangement of the flowers, and remarked on the fragrance of the oolong. It was the most polite trap ever laid. "Let us take our tea," he began, "as civilized people do, in spite of tragic events. For is it not perhaps in civility that truth is found?" No one responded, though Sylvia offered a faint, unreadable smile. Poirot lifted his cup. "The roses, I am told, are at their best this week. Such beauty, though it is often cultivated through pain, thorns, prunings, and patience. One does not arrive at perfection by accident. Sir Hugo set his cup down sharply. If you've brought us here to philosophize about gardening, Poirot, you'll excuse me. Not at all, monsieur. Only I find roses to be an ideal metaphor. Consider Mr. Dobb. He spoke of grafting methods of the spiral system to your son. Very clever, a gardener who thinks in pattern. Sylvie cocked her head. He was methodical, but I never heard him speak of spiral. Ronald looked up startled. He told me. I assumed others knew. Poirot took a biscuit and broke it in half with delicate precision. And yet, you are the only one who speaks of it, which means he trusted you, or perhaps warned you. Letitia interrupted softly. He was a man of silence. When he spoke at all, it meant something. Poirot turned to her. Indeed, Mademoiselle Vale, may I ask, what was the last thing Henry said to you? Letitia hesitated. He told me to be careful, that not all roots stay buried. Poirot nodded, pleased. A most interesting phrase. Tell me, did anyone in this house have reason to fear what he might uncover? No answer. He leaned slightly forward. A canister disappeared from the potting shed. Someone burned documents, and a residue was found on the roses, which I suspect will prove toxic. This was not the act of a moment. It was prepared. Sir Hugo snorted. Poisoned roses. Absurd! Who would go through all that trouble for an old gardener? Poirot placed his cup down and turned to Ronald. You feel this is all directed toward you? Ronald nodded, eyes tired. Everyone looks at me like I buried him myself. And yet Poirot said gently, you are still here. You make no effort to run, to shift blame. You answer every question with the same soft uncertainty, which is why I do not believe you are guilty. A beat of silence. Marrow, who had entered midway to stand at the back, cleared his throat, but said nothing. Poirot continued. The guilty one. They do not collapse under pressure. They thrive in the illusion of innocence. They play polite. They nod and observe, always slightly removed, always in control. Because guilt is not about panic. It is about maintenance, control. He turned sharply to Madame Sylvie. And you, Madame, what do you think of control? Sylvie did not blink. I think it is essential, especially in a house where one's position is always conditional. Poirot's tone shifted. So, you maintain control with Sir Hugo, with the staff, even with your silence. But Henry Dobb was not one to be managed, was he? Sylvie's smile didn't falter. I ignored him. He did the same. It was a truce until he saw something. Something you could not ignore. Sir Hugo slammed his palm on the arm of his chair. Enough, Poirot. If you have evidence, show it. Otherwise, stop dragging my household through riddles. Poirot gave him a tight smile. Very well, monsieur. Let me offer one. He retrieved a folded note from his inner pocket, the same one he had found buried near the pergola. This was written by Henry Dobb, found in the soil he so carefully tended. He read it aloud. Some roses bloom for love. Others bloom to hide the thorns beneath. Letitia gasped. Ronald looked confused. Sylvie crossed her legs. Sir Hugo stared. Poetic nonsense. Poirot pressed. But the choice of words, bloom to hide the thorns, implies someone is pretending, cultivating an illusion. Miss Dobb was not a man of metaphor. This was a warning. Poirot stood. Now let us imagine. Someone wanted him gone. Not through confrontation. No, he was too well liked by staff. too quiet, but through a method that could be mistaken for natural death. A poison absorbed through skin, transferred by touch or by pruning roses coated with it. A meticulous method, and one must ask, who would have access to such a substance? He looked at Letitia. Not you. You are practical. He turned to Ronald. Not you. You are emotional. To Sir Hugo. Not you. You are impatient. Then to Sylvie. But you, madam, you are precise. Sylvie arched a brow. Is this accusation or admiration? Poirot did not answer. Instead, he pulled from his other pocket a pair of gloves, faintly stained with powder at the fingertips. I found these beneath a loose panel in the greenhouse. Not thrown out, not burned, hidden. And the powder matches the residue on the roses. Sylvia rose slowly. Many people own gloves. Yes. Poirot agreed. But these are yours. French-made, monogrammed on the inside cuff. She looked at him for a moment, calculating. Then she laughed. A soft, elegant sound. You think I killed him over what? A quarrel? A threat? Poirot stepped closer. No, madame. I believe Henry Dobb found out something you did not want known. Perhaps about your marriage. Perhaps something older. But he knew. And you, with your careful manners and your knowledge of toxins, likely acquired long before you came to this house. You chose the most elegant method. Sylvia did not deny it. And yet you have no witnesses, no confession, just theories. Poirot bowed slightly. Then allow me to continue playing the game. He turned to the others. Until I confirm the substance on these gloves, I shall not accuse, but I ask each of you to consider who in this house benefits from silence, and who, if uncovered, loses everything. He left the room then, leaving behind a chill heavier than before. The game had been set, but the guilty now knew they were no longer playing alone. By the next morning, a quiet dread had settled over Barrington Hall. Meals were eaten in silence. Doors were opened and closed more cautiously. The once pristine manor now felt like a cracked vase, still holding form, but one jolt away from shattering completely. Poirot, as ever, maintained his impeccable schedule. He took his tea at 7, his walk at 8, and by 9 o'clock he was seated once again in the conservatory, waiting, as he often did, for truth to arrive unannounced. It did. Letitia Vale came to him in a state of composed panic, her notebook clutched to her chest. Monsieur Poirot, she said, you must come to the study now. Something's happened. He followed her quickly through the main hall, where the air felt unusually cold. As they entered the study, the smell of scorched paper hit him first. On the desk lay several sheets of parchment, burned at the edges, but not entirely destroyed. A shallow brass tray sat nearby, filled with ash. Letitia pointed toward the fireplace. I found these in the grate. Someone tried to destroy them last night, after everyone had gone to bed. I usually tidy early in the morning. They hadn't finished burning. Poirot pulled on his gloves and gently extracted the least damaged sheet. The writing was hurried in block capitals, but unmistakably familiar. He had seen Ronald's journal pages, yet this was different in tone, panicked, unfiltered. He read aloud. If anything happens to me, tell Poirot to check the south wall. The truth is in the roots. I shouldn't have said anything. I think she knows I know. Poirot looked up slowly. Where is Ronald? Letitia's voice was tight. No one has seen him this morning. His room was locked. The maid knocked several times. No answer. Poirot wasted no time. He ascended the staircase with Letitia close behind. Ronald's room was at the far end of the east corridor. The door was shut, the brass handle cooled to the touch. Poirot knocked. No reply. He signaled Letitia to step back, then turned the handle. It was unlocked. The room was empty, the bed unmade. Books on the desk stood upright, a sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing what appeared to be a labyrinth of interwoven roots. Poirot scanned the space. No note, no clothes missing, but the window was ajar. He leaned out and looked below. The ledge descended onto a narrow side roof just above the trellised southern garden wall, a feasible, if clumsy, escape route. Poirot did not speak. He simply turned, descended the stairs, and made his way to the south wall. He read the name on the passport aloud. Celeste No. Letitia frowned. That's not Madame Sylve's name. No, Poirot said. It is not, but it is her face. He examined the deed, handwritten, notarized, but unsigned. It was a document offering joint inheritance rights to an estate in Normandy contingent on a marriage that never occurred. The name of the other party, Henry Dobbins. Poirot exhaled sharply. Monder Henry Dobb was once engaged to this woman before she became Sylvie Barrington. Letitia was stunned. She lied about her name. More than that, she disappeared from France, changed identities, married Sir Hugo. But Henry Dobb, he remembered he had proof, and perhaps he threatened to reveal her past. Letitia pointed to the photograph. But that still doesn't explain Ronald. Where is he? Poirot didn't answer. That evening, after failing to locate Ronald anywhere on the estate, Merrow finally arrived with a patrol unit. He's fled, Merrow declared. The evidence, the burned note, he knew we were onto him. Now he's vanished. Guilty men run. Poirot said nothing, but he made a quiet request to have the southern garden searched thoroughly, including the greenhouse, potting shed, and the trellis roofs. 2 hours later, just as the last of the search team began to report nothing, a stable boy ran in breathlessly. "Sir, he's here in the greenhouse." Let Mio, Poirot, and Letitia followed him swiftly to the structure. Inside, sitting on stone bench beneath the hanging geraniums, was Ronald, pale, bruised at the knee, his hands stained with dirt. Merrow stepped forward. "You're under suspicion of evading inquiry and quite likely murder." Ronald looked up, dazed. "I didn't run. I fell from the roof. I was trying to get out. I was afraid. But not of you, of her." Poirot knelt. "Tell me all of it." Ronald's voice was cracked. "I overheard something days ago. Madame Sylvie, she was in the garden at night, speaking to someone on the phone. She said he remembers Normandy. She said the papers must vanish. I didn't know what it meant until Henry died. I went to the south wall after finding his old pruning journal. He'd marked something like an X. I found the box there last night. And the fire in the study?" Poirot asked. "I panicked. I didn't know if it was safe to keep them in my room. I thought I could destroy the personal stuff, but still give you the important papers. But I burned too much. Then I thought, I'll hide, watch from a distance, figure out who's watching me." Poirot turned to me. He did not run. He was afraid, but not guilty. Merrow grunted but didn't protest. Poirot helped Ronald to his feet. "Come, monsieur, you will stay in the conservatory tonight, where I can keep you safe from roses and from people." That night, as the wind howled gently against the panes, Poirot sat alone in the drawing room. Before him lay the photograph, the passport, the deed. The puzzle had revealed a buried chapter, one of love, abandonment, and reinvention. Henry Dobb had once been Henry Dobbins, a young man spurned by a woman who reinvented herself as Madame Sylvie. He had remained silent for decades, choosing peace over revenge, until perhaps a legal complication or whispered threat made him act. And now he was dead. But the one who silenced him had underestimated something vital. Henry had buried the truth in roots, and now Poirot held the harvest. The morning after Ronald was found in the greenhouse, Poirot awoke early, foregoing his usual second cup of tisane in favor of a solitary walk through the garden. The estate was still heavy with unease. Servants kept their heads low, and the air carried a sense of reluctant anticipation, as though the house knew it was bracing for something final. Poirot moved with purpose, his steps deliberate as he crossed the gravel path toward the pergola. He passed the central arch slowly, letting his eyes rest on the exact spot where Henry Dobb's body had been discovered. The earth was still disturbed beneath the ivy-covered trellis, though fresh blooms had already been placed there by someone with good intentions and no understanding of the dead. He bent down, brushing away loose petals with gloved fingers. The soil had been overturned before, likely during the initial investigation. But Poirot's interest was not in the obvious. No, he was looking for the one thing no one had yet considered, not what was taken, but what was left. 5 minutes later, he stood. In his hand was a tiny brass button, partially buried under the soil near the eastern post. Its surface was slightly tarnished, but engraved on it was a small French manufacturer's mark. Too fine a detail for a gardener's coat. Certainly not Sir Hugo's either. Poirot smiled softly to himself and tucked the button into his pocket. Back at the house, he found Ronald sitting in the conservatory with a book he clearly wasn't reading. Poirot approached gently. "You are well this morning, monsieur?" Ronald nodded. "Better than last night." Poirot gestured toward the door. "Will you walk with me? I need a second opinion on something." They strolled together toward the rose walk. Poirot waited until they reached the center before speaking. "You are a man of the written word. Detail, nuance. I wonder if you might help me interpret something." He pulled the photograph from his coat pocket. Celeste Know's youthful portrait. Ronald stared. "That's Madame Sylvie. Oui, but not as Madame Sylvie Binkton. Before that, this was taken in France, I believe. She was engaged once, long ago." Ronald looked stunned to Henry. Poirot nodded. "Yes, Henry Dobbins. He was known as then. They planned to marry. Would have made him heir to a small property in Normandy, but she vanished before it could happen. Reinvented herself, married Sir Hugo." Ronald ran a hand through his hair. "She told us she was born in Lyon, that she had no living relatives." Smiled faintly. "A convenient erasure of history. But pasts, monsieur, like seeds, do not always stay buried. Sometimes they grow wild when untended." Poirot then produced the brass button. "This," he said, "was found at the site of Dobb's death. Not from his clothes, not Sir Hugo's, but Madame Sylvie owns a traveling cloak. Heavy wool, military buttons, French tailoring." Ronald's face pad. "You think she was there when he died?" Poirot was already walking again. "Not just there. She arranged it. I believe she applied the poison to the roses herself. Not in large quantities, no. Just enough, placed delicately, knowing Dobb would come through at dawn and touch the petals as he always did, absorbed through the skin, a toxin that mimics cardiac arrest." Ronald stopped short. "But how do you know all this?" "It's indirect." Poirot turned. "Yes, monsieur. And that is where my clue comes in." He pulled from his vest pocket a piece of paper, the one partially burned, recovered from the study. "Ronald, did you write this?" Ronald leaned in and read it again. "No, that's not my handwriting." Poirot nodded. ... I knew that, but it imitates yours badly. The person who wrote this wanted to make it look like you left a warning, a final note, but they couldn't replicate the slight rightward tilt in your strokes. And the ink is not from your usual pen. You use blue-black. This is dark green. Only one other person in the house uses a fountain pen with green ink. Ronald's mouth fell open. Letitia Poirot smiled faintly. Exactly. They returned to the house in silence, the morning sun casting long shadows along the corridor walls. Once inside, Poirot asked Letitia to join him in the study. She came quickly, notebook in hand, expecting another routine question. "Letitia," Poirot said gently, "how long have you known about Madame Sille's past?" Her eyes did not flicker, but her lips parted in the barest hint of surprise. What do you mean?" Poirot sat. "The passport, the photograph, the deed. You knew about them. You were the one who kept the gardener's journals in order. You handled the state documents. You likely discovered the connection years ago." Letitia hesitated. "I may have suspected, but I never said anything." Poirot nodded until Henry threatened to. "You saw the tension, and when Henry refused to back down, you feared what would follow." Letitia's voice dropped. "I thought she'd fire him. I didn't know. I never imagined." Poirot's gaze remained fixed. "But when he died, you panicked. You tried to cast suspicion elsewhere, burned parts of the warning, forged others. You wanted Ronald to seem erratic, afraid, as if he were hiding something." Letitia's composure crumbled. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I just wanted order. After years of working for this family, seeing the dysfunction, the unspoken things, I needed something to make sense." Poirot nodded slowly. "But in preserving order, mademoiselle, you helped conceal murder." She said nothing. The silence was answer enough. That evening, Poirot requested a final meeting in the drawing room, just as he had once before. The same guests, the same tea. But now the air carried a charged stillness. "I believe," Poirot said calmly, "it is time we spoke plainly." He laid the button, the photograph, and the partially burned page on the table. Henry Dobb was not just a gardener. He was once Henry Dobbins, a man who loved and was left behind. He came here not by accident, but by quiet design. And when Madame Sylvie reappeared in England under a new name, he knew her. He watched. He waited. Perhaps he intended no harm. But then something changed. Perhaps it was a disagreement. Perhaps he threatened disclosure. He turned to Sylvie. "You feared the past, and you chose to remove it." Sylvie's mask did not crack. She lifted her tea delicately. "Proof. Mercier." Poirot gestured to Letitia. "You left fingerprints on the forged note, madame, and she has agreed to provide testimony. You see, those who hide thorns forget. Roses must still face the sun." Sylvie set her cup down very slowly. "So it ends like this." Poirot offered a slight bow. "No, madame, it ends in justice." That evening, under Poirot's quiet instruction, the household was summoned to the grand dining room, not for dinner, but for truth. The long mahogany table, usually adorned with polished silver and rigid formality, now served a more serious purpose. The curtains were drawn. A single chandelier hung above, casting soft light on the waiting faces. Sir Hugo Barrington sat at the head of the table, stiff-backed and scowling, cane across his lap like a ceremonial weapon. Madame Sylvie took her place beside him, poised and silent, a statue of cultivated elegance. Letitia stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, her face tense. Ronald sat at the far end, shoulders hunched, expression weary. Inspector Merrow stood near the door, arms folded, listening carefully. Poirot, ever meticulous, stood at the center with his hands gently clasped. "I've gathered you here not to accuse in haste," he began softly, "but to arrange the pieces of this story so that even the shadows may speak plainly." He looked first to Ronald. "Monsieur Ronald, you were the first to notice something was amiss, not just in the death of Henry Dobb, but in the silences that followed. You sensed it before the rest, yet the burden fell on your shoulders without cause." Ronald blinked in confusion. Poirot continued, "You were meant to be the distraction, the emotional one, the hesitant heir, a convenient suspect. The note planted in the study, made to mimic your handwriting, was meant to suggest panic, fear, guilt. But your pen, monsieur, does not bleed green ink." He turned to Letitia. "That ink belongs to you." The room shifted. All eyes turned toward her. Letitia did not deny it. Poirot's voice remained calm. "You forged the note to mislead, not because you killed Henry Dobb, but because you saw what was happening and tried to push suspicion away from the truth. You feared it might fall on you, or perhaps on someone else. And in that fear, you acted rashly." Letitia lowered her gaze. "I couldn't allow another scandal in this house. Not again," Sir Hugo growled. "You tampered with evidence. For what purpose?" Letitia lifted her chin. "To preserve what little peace this place had left." Poirot raised a hand. "And yet the peace, monsieur, has always been illusion. This household is a garden of concealed roots. Which brings us to the heart of the matter." He stepped towards Sylvie. "Madame, may I call you Celeste?" Sylve's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. "You were once engaged to Henry Dobbins, a young woman in France, tied to a man of modest means and honest labor. But ambition pulled you elsewhere. You vanished, reinvented yourself, married Sir Hugo, a man of influence. And when Henry Dobb, now Dobb, reappeared here, you did not expect him to recognize you. Or perhaps you hoped time had softened his memory." Poirot paused, then placed the photograph and passport on the table. "But he did recognize you, and when it became clear he would not keep silent, whether for justice, for love, or for reparation, you took steps to silence him." Sir Hugo snapped. "What is this nonsense? Are you saying my wife poisoned a man over an old affair?" Poirot nodded calmly. "I am, and I shall explain how." He walked slowly along the table's edge. Henry Dobb maintained the rose pergola. Every morning he clipped, pruned, and touched the blooms with bare hands. You knew this. You used a contact poison, a slow-acting botanical agent, something absorbed through skin. You applied it to the roses the evening before his death. That is why you were seen in the garden before dawn. Not for quiet, for placement. He pulled from his coat the gloves with the powder residue. These were found hidden in the greenhouse. The powder on them matches the residue on the pergola roses. The gloves are yours, monogrammed. Sylvie spoke at last. Her voice was low, controlled. "You cannot prove I poisoned anything. Gloves are not poison." Poirot nodded. "No, but the toxin has been identified. A plant derivative, known to grow only in a few regions of Provence, absorbed slowly, leaves no trace in a superficial autopsy, but it is traceable in blood, and I have requested an exhumation. Scotland Yard's laboratory has the sample from the rose. It matches the toxic compound. Sylvie's jaw tightened. Poirot turned to Mio. Inspector, if you would, there is a warrant being processed as we speak for further examination of the gloves and the remaining plants in the greenhouse. I believe you will find a hidden cutting of a Conatum montanum, blue monkshood, cultivated rare and fatal. Marrow nodded slowly. We'll confirm it, and if it's there, she'll hang. Sir Hugo rose sharply, slamming his cane to the floor. You lie. My wife would never. This is character assassination. Poirot, that man was a gardener, a servant. Poirot turned on him sharper than before. No, Sir Hugo, he was a man who remembered a life before deception, a man who buried truth in roots when no one else would listen. And you, who claimed command over every corner of this house, turned blind to what grew in your own garden. Sylvie stood then, her mask slipping just a little. He threatened me. You don't understand. He wanted to ruin everything. My reputation, my marriage, my position. Poirot's voice was soft now. So you took his life to protect your lie. A long pause. The room felt breathless. Sylvie stepped back from the table and slowly removed her wedding ring. She placed it gently on the polished wood. Word of Madame Sylvie Bington's arrest, the sudden emergence of her hidden identity, and the mysterious death of a long Irving gardener now carried an electricity that crackled through the Gloucestershire village like a coming storm. The locals whispered her name with a mixture of disbelief and theatrical satisfaction. Such things, they agreed, only happened in novels. Inside the manor, Poirot dressed with his usual precision. Though the case had reached its penultimate note, he had yet to deliver the full melody. For him, resolution did not rest in a confession or an arrest. It rested in logic made whole. In every contradiction reconciled, he requested the household, what remained of it, to gather once more. This time they met in the library, not by force, but by necessity. Poirot did not command obedience. His presence invited truth, and truth now had only one room left to inhabit. Sir Hugo slouched in the high-backed leather chair he once ruled from. Word of Madame Sylvie Bington's arrest, the sudden emergence of her hidden identity, and the mysterious death of a long Irving gardener now carried an electricity that crackled through the Gloucestershire village like a coming storm. The locals whispered her name with a mixture of disbelief and theatrical satisfaction. Such things, they agreed, only happened in novels. Inside the manor, Poirot dressed with his usual precision. Though the case had reached its penultimate note, he had yet to deliver the full melody. For him, resolution did not rest in a confession or an arrest. It rested in logic made whole. In every contradiction reconciled, he requested the household, what remained of it, to gather once more. This time they met in the library, not by force, but by necessity. Poirot did not command obedience. His presence invited truth, and truth now had only one room left to inhabit. Sir Hugo slouched in the high-backed leather chair he once ruled from. His eyes were bloodshot, though whether from drink or disgrace was unclear. Ronald stood by the windows, looking outward, but not seeing. Letitia remained composed, though her expression carried the wear of withheld emotion. Inspector Merrow leaned against a bookshelf, scribbling notes without comment. Poirot stood near the hearth, hands gently folded. "You may think this matter finished," he began. "The accused has been removed, the crime seemingly solved. But if you will permit me, I should like to offer the complete picture, not because it changes the outcome, but because it reveals the cost." He turned first to Sir Hugo. "You were deceived, Mercier." "Yes, but you also permitted that deception.